Hello everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to Paul Ricard here in the south of France for a new season of the European F3 Open. 16 races await the gigantic 31-car field, which has congregated here at the Le Castellet circuit. We're about half an hour out of Marseille, half an hour out of Toulon as well, up in the hills in the centre of Provence, where the weather is very uncharacteristically unspring-like. As you can see, the circuit has been enveloped in a fine mist, murk and periodic showers throughout the course of the day, and the weather doesn't look like it's going to clear anytime soon, which is going to give the drivers some very interesting choices when it comes to setting up their cars for this afternoon's first race of the year. As we said, a gigantic 31-car field, and in qualifying this morning they were headed up by Nelson Mason, the Canadian driver for Team Westech, who was on pole position by the slenderest of margins from the British driver Hector Hurst. Just 49 thousandths of a second clear was Mason's advantage, and there he is lining up on the grid, running wet tyres. Mason, who's previously raced in Formula 3 in Italy, looking to do the full season with Team Westech, who were overjoyed after qualifying with the performance of their charge, particularly as qualifying this morning was delayed by about an hour or so due to the weather, so the drivers kicking their heels in the garage for quite some time before they actually got unleashed out onto the circuit. Alongside their Mason on the front row of the grid is Hector Hurst, who makes the step onwards from the FIA Formula 2 Championship to the European F3 Open this year. Hurst, who raced here last year in Formula 2, looked in feisty form in qualifying as the first car out of the pits and was pushing as hard as he could, and as a result came just 500ths of a second adrift of that pole mark. Third place, another of the Team Westech cars, this time the Venezuelan driver Roberto Larroca. Larroca, who competed last season, at least for part of the year, for Westech in the European F3 Open. Luck never really went his way, so he will be looking to capitalise on that third place grid slot. Of course, with 16 races ahead, this is just the opening exchange. The narrative of the season is yet to become clear, but all of these drivers want to get themselves right to the sharp end of the field as early as possible in the season. Fourth on the grid then Sandy Stuvik, the Thai driver. And as you may have noticed, a lot of different nationalities here on the grid. 20 nationalities in all represented in the 31-car field of the European F3 Open, which shows that in a world of an ever-complex junior single-seater structure, Formula 3 is still the category that attracts the most diverse and talented fields of drivers to race in Europe as they look to make the step on up the motorsport ladder towards Formula 1. Fifth on the grid then Santiago Ureta, the very quick Uruguayan driver who graduates from the Formula Arbath Championship. And Ureta, many people in the paddocks tip for this season. Certainly, you saw any of the Formula Arbath races last year, you'll know just how quick Ureta could be. I think a little bit of a surprise maybe that he wasn't on pole position, but qualifying this morning was held on a very damp, slippery surface, and so that the grid maybe not entirely going as we would expected it to go in terms of form. Sixth on the grid is the Russian driver Alexei Chuklin, who is being driver coached this weekend by Duncan Tappy, the former Formula Renault champion of the UK. As we take a look then at the full starting lineup. So it is Mason and Hurst on row 1. Row 2 then Roberto Larroca and Sandy Stuvik. Row 3, Santiago Ureta and Alexei Chuklin. All of them running in Lara F312. The first, the Copper class cars for the F308s, is in the hands of the young Spanish driver Igor Urian, who switches across from the Radical European Masters. He shares row 4 with Matteo Vita. Watch for Spencer Piggott as well, the quick American driver Cameron Twynham, making the step into European racing from the Intersteps Championship. The same goes for his Westech teammate Liam Venter. Yarin Sturm, we saw briefly last year, the Israeli driver, lines up in 15th. All-female row 11 with Valeria Carballo and then Vicky Piria, who switches across from the GP3 Championship. Sean Wilkins saw a race winner in Formula 3 last year in the MSV's F3 Cup over in Anglesey, where he took a double-header victory alongside a very mixed year in Formula Renault BARC. And then Saud Al Faisal, another Radical driver who has pretty much won everything there is to win in Radicals in the Middle East. The Saudi Arabian driver completes the 31-car grid then as they set off on their formation lap. The race duration is going to be either 35 minutes or 14 laps, whichever comes sooner. Talking you through it, just to introduce myself, I'm Ben Evans, and I'll be here throughout the course of the season for all of the European F3 Open races. As you can see, the murk is beginning to descend once more upon the track, and the cars weaving around, getting some heat into their tyre. So that I have been joined for the early stage of this race by the team principal of Team Westech, John Miller. And, well, John, conditions far from ideal, but for your team in qualifying, it went very well, first and third.
Very well, thank you, Ben. It was a pretty exciting qualifying session. The top 4 cars overall covered by only a 10th and a half, so I don't think you can ask for much more excitement than that. The fog seems to be descending again, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Should say that John has agreed to join us on the premise that if he gets summoned to race control, then he'll have to leave us. But of course, with 31 teenage drivers on the grid, and the first race of the year, no such thing could happen. They're all going to behave themselves today, John.
We've got 8 cars, so I'm sure on that basis there's no chance I'm going anywhere.
Absolutely, and we were just saying before you joined us, 20 nationalities on the grid, 31 cars. It shows that Formula 3 is still the must-do championship for young drivers.
Absolutely. Formula 3, there's still several championships across the world. In the main, they're all pretty strong. The cars are fantastic. They're superb teaching vehicles for young developing drivers, which is why the drivers want to do it.
Right, we're just getting notification through that with the fog coming down, we're going to be starting behind the safety car. So the race has started and the race clock has begun, so the 35 minutes is ticking down. We are on the first lap of the race. They're lined up behind the safety car, and really, John, in these conditions, that's the right choice. And this is what we've seen all day, that you've had pockets of clear weather, then the mist and fog has come down, and although looking along the back, the Mistral Straight, it's reasonably clear. Here in our contrary position over the start finish line, you can barely see across the track.
It's amazing. It can change from minute to minute. We waited, I'm not sure, half an hour for qualifying while it was delayed. I would walk out of the garage 1 minute, it's clear. The next minute you can't see across the straight.
And we briefly touched on the Formula 3 cars and how spectacular they are, because to all intents and purposes they look like mini Formula 1 cars, but the real challenge for these drivers is that, strange as it may seem for somebody who, if you just drive a road car on the road, they've actually got far less power than the grip they've got available to them. And then the real challenge for them is to manage that corner speed, manage that momentum, and be as smooth as they can be.
Well, that's a common comment that we get from new drivers. They're always amazed by the grip. This weekend, one of our regular drivers, Ed Jones, is on Formula Renault World Series duty, so we've got Spencer Piggott in, a young American driver who's doing a really good job, and that's what amazed him. In the first time driving a proper Formula 3 car, the downforce and the grip that was available.
Now, I think Spencer Piggott, he's lined up down in 10th position. I think he could be a driver to watch in this race. He won Jeremy Shaw's US driver search a couple of seasons ago, which brought him over to the UK to race in the Formula Ford Festival. And I remember watching that weekend, being so impressed with how quick he is. And I suspect we could see him charging up the order as this race progresses. Well, the first lap of the race is going to be completed behind the safety car, and that means that in due course the second lap of the race will be completed behind the safety car. So they're very much in grid order, which is good news for you, John, because it means that your man Nelson Mason can at least chalk up 1 lap at the head of the field. But Hector Hurst, who qualified in second, will give him a real challenge, because unlike many of these drivers, Hector has raced here at Paul Ricard last season in Formula 2, and so there's a couple of the tricks.
Yes, obviously we were back here in February for the Formula 3 Open Winter Series, and Nelson won then from the pole position. So he knows the track as well. Hector did a very good job in qualifying. He was under 500ths of a second behind Nelson, so there's hardly anything in it. And the drivers behind, Roberto La Rocca, the next Team Westech driver on the grid, and RP drivers behind, Stuvik and Urrutia, very, very close. And
we should mention that the organisers of the European F3 Open work very, very hard to keep the championship as affordable as possible for young drivers. And what that means is they run on controlled Dunlop tyres. It means that the engine is controlled, quite a few of the parts controlled as well. So what these drivers aren't having to do is spend a fortune on development they might have to be doing in other championships. Really, all the money goes in going into the race and ensuring they're actually up against rivals in as near as can be, aside from setup adjustments, identical cars.
Pretty much, yeah. The driver can make a big difference in the formula. Clearly our team does a good job, I'd like to think, but the other teams do a good job as well. Most teams have won races over the years, so it does come down to the driver, and the Open definitely provides good value. And you have to look here, we've got a 31-car grid, which is pretty much every current Formula 3 Open car that exists. So, the organisers, they're doing something right.
So in terms of the established team, well, we've obviously talked about Team Westech. There's the Emilio Velotta team, who prepares the car of Hector Hurst, and then last year's championship winning team, RP Motorsport, and they had the two protagonists really for most of last year's title, Nicolo Schiro and Gianmarco Raimondo, of course. How could we forget the dramatic end to last year's championship at the final corner in Barcelona? Schiro, who's now stepped on to race the International GT Open. And then moving into the category this year, and I think this is very interesting, is the BVM team, who we've previously seen in the World Series by Renault, amongst other things. And their highest qualifying driver, Mario Marasca, in 9th.
Oh, sorry.
So he's well up there. And they're also running Vicky Piria, who's switched across from GP3, although she had a bit of a disappointing qualifying period down in 22nd. But they're a team we can expect to maybe see moving up through the field as the year goes by. Fortunately, the safety car continues out there, and as we can see, the view along the Mistral Straight is somewhat more obscure than it was last time around.
Yes, well, I guess as the team owner of the cars in first and third, I'm quite happy with the safety car.
Very much so. Now, there are two classes within the F3 Open. There's the principal class, which is for the Lara F312 chassis, and then the copper class for the Lara F308 chassis, so that the previous iteration. And it's good to see both classes well supported, because you run cars in both classes, John, and the copper class for me always seems like an excellent way for drivers to make the step into Formula 3, understand what the cars are about before they get thrust into position when actually challenging for race wins.
The copper class really is absolutely fantastic. A lot of series do have a secondary class, and in some series, unfortunately, it's quite poorly supported. Here, the copper class is extremely strong. And we've got 31 cars on the grid, 18 are the current generation cars, and 13 are the previous generation. So, you have to win at that, you have to be pretty good.
And last year's Copper Class champion, Kevin Giovese, of course, has moved directly into the GP2 Championship, where he's been running very competitively. So we've still got all of them circulation. We've got the fans who have been waiting very patiently all day. It's an absolutely fantastic facility here at Paul Ricard. The paddock is very open. The fans have been able to mingle with the drivers all day, get autographs, and unfortunately they have been somewhat frustrated in terms of getting to enjoy some of the on-track race action. So the safety car has come through and reeled off another lap. So it is, of course, Mason then who is in the lead of the race, but as such, the race has not really got itself underway just yet. So they file through behind the safety car. And from a driver's point of view, John, this must be hugely frustrating, having worked very hard over the winter to put the package together, to put the budget together, to arrive here in Paul Ricard, and then to be thwarted before you can actually get underway with the racing.
Yes, I guess so, but Formula 3 is often seen as the first real professional step of motor racing, so all of our drivers are professionals and they're well prepared and they're able to handle it. It won't be a problem.
But I guess one of the key elements of that professionalism is actually really maintaining the concentration here behind the safety car, because most of these drivers are used to driving a Formula 3 car at full pace. That's their level of concentration. That's what they'll have been training for. And actually, when you're running at that much lower speed, it is a little bit easier to have that lapse of concentration, particularly if you've got this protracted running.
Yes, the drivers, should have been briefed and properly prepared. They all know what they're doing about keeping tyre temperature up, keeping brake temperature up, keeping an eye on temperatures, and pressures, and I'm sure that their race engineers are.
Switch to the stick 9. So yes, the race has had a couple of extra laps added. The race clock continues to tick by, which means that we're almost we're 8.5 minutes into this race. The 35-minute race clock is ticking onwards, and whilst I don't think we'll probably be going racing at the end of this lap, looking out for our contrary position, it's a teeny bit clearer than it was a few moments ago, so we may hopefully see the safety car coming in fairly shortly. The race duration, as we say, has been extended out to 16 laps. In recognition of those credit laps we're going with the safety car, but I suspect that given that we've had this period behind the safety car in the early stages, we'll probably be looking at going to the timed 35-minute race, which, again, Joe, you've talked about this being a step up for the drivers. 35 minutes is actually, you mentioned the Formula Renault Euro Cup earlier on, that's 10 minutes more than the Euro Cup, and given the G-force in these cars, given the concentration required, that's actually quite a big jump.
With the concentration and the focus required from the drivers, it is a big jump, but if drivers want to be successful, these are the things they need to learn, these are the things they need to master, and this is a good place to learn it.
So over the winter, you have a new driver who comes to you as a team principal, says, I want to do the European F3 Open. What sort of training and conditioning would you be looking for them to do to get themselves prepared to compete here this weekend?
Well, most of the drivers these days tend to have a full package behind them, whether it's fitness training, media training, how to prepare themselves mentally for their driving. Most of the younger drivers have driver coaches, certainly within our team. The copper drivers all have dedicated driver coaches, and we go testing. One of the great things about Formula 3 is we can do a lot of mileage, and what young drivers need above all else is seat time and experience.
I completely agree, and this I think is why the European F3 Open is such an attractive package. If you compare it to something like particularly GP3, where you've got a very limited number of race weekends through the season and then an equally limited number of test days, and actually that the drivers don't get the amount of time behind the wheel, which is what they really need. You think about somebody like Lewis Hamilton. When he came into Formula 1, he had done so many thousands of miles of testing in each of the classes that he had been competing in, and that is why he was able to have such a strong rookie season. It's why maybe some of the drivers who've come up through the GP3, GP2 route, then they reach Formula 1. They haven't actually had that many miles underneath them, comparatively speaking, with a racing car, and that's maybe why they struggle, and that's why Formula 3 remains important.
Yes, I mean, with our drivers, we start in Spain in December, where we go for at least a week. Then we have a winter rebuild program in January and the early part of February. And then ideally, before we get here, we generally would like to have done 14 days on track. Although this year, we've been a little stymied with snow and ice and various terrible conditions across Europe. Although hopefully, I don't know about you, I think it looks a little bit clearer now, Ben.
It does look a little bit clearer, so we might well be able to go racing at the end of this lap. It was beginning to get slightly clearer. They're about halfway around. They've just gone onto the Mistral Straight now, which is bisected here at Paul Ricard by the chicane. And Paul Ricard, briefly explaining the history of the circuit, has always been very much at the cutting edge of circuit technology. When the circuit track was first built in the early 1970s, it was considered to be supremely innovative because it had a wall separating the pit lane from the track, and in those days that wasn't always the case. And then after hosting the French Grand Prix on and off through until the 1990 season, the track then really invented itself as a high-tech test track facility, and you can see what looks like almost a lunar landscape with those blue and red stripes. Well, that is actually the high-tech alternative to gravel traps and other runoff areas. The blue strips you can see there are ultra-high grip tarmac, which means if a driver runs wide onto them, it will slow them down, it will cost them some time, cost them a couple of places, but won't damage the car when they rejoin the race. The red strips, well, that's an ultra-high grip and ultra-abrasive surface, and that will do a whole heap of no good at all to the tyres as the drivers get onto that, and normally necessitates a pit stop for a fresh set of boots. And there you see perfectly illustrated the blue and the red strips. It's a very innovative approach to circuit design. I think probably one that as a team principal, John, you welcome, because for the drivers there's actually not an awful lot for them to hit. They can really find the limit without risking damaging the car.
Yes, having said that, we have had drivers find things to hit, funnily enough. It is quite interesting. The first time you come here, it takes you aback. It's very surprising. I guess we're used to it now. I think we've been coming here, and it's probably our fourth or fifth time here. Our instructions to our drivers are simple. If you get on the blue or the red, try and go straight over it without turning the wheel, which minimises the damage to the tyres.
Okay, I can understand that, because if you try to correct the slide, there's a good chance that you will do quite a lot of damage to the tyres. And throughout the year, Paul Ricard is used as a test facility, particularly in the run-up to the Le Mans 24 Hours, where it's not uncommon to see the top teams running 24-hour tests here at the circuit, which is how the teams and drivers get in condition for events such as the one. So are we going to go racing at the end of this lap? No, we're not. So another lap is going to be reeled off here behind the safety car. We have got 21 minutes and change left on the race clock. We complete the fourth lap of the race, and thus far everybody is still running. There's been no casualties behind the safety car, and for a lot of these drivers, John, this could be a blessing in disguise once we do go racing, because looking at the cars on the grid, most of them have got wet tyres on, but the track actually isn't that wet, and at full race pelt, those wets could have been crying enough in the latter stages.
That's a very good point, Ben. I can imagine there's people out there, perhaps not those at the very front, maybe halfway back, who might just be thinking about coming in, changing to slicks. They'd go back out, they'd be back at the end of the train, as it were, but they wouldn't be far behind. And if we got 10 minutes of racing and the track dried out, that could be a real genius move.
Because what you can't see there are any pools of standing water where you could cool down those wet tyres. Essentially, they would be very, very grippy, but given the downforce and grip in those cars we talked about, it would only be a couple of racing laps before a dry line emerged, and after that those wet tyres begin to feel very sorry for themselves, because essentially what happens is they superheat, and all of the tread pattern which gives the grip in the wet weather actually moves around on the tyre. It's a little bit like driving or on marbles, essentially, or roller skating on ball bearings, as one driver described it to me, and it really does take the pace out. So let's see if anybody ducks into the pits maybe at the end of this lap. At the moment, though, most of the drivers focused on weaving around, still trying to get a little bit of heat into those tyres, because not only is it very murky today, but it's also unseasonably cold. It's about 12 degrees here at Paul Ricard.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges we've had, is when the fog has lifted, and it did rain torrentially earlier, and although the rain has stopped quite a long time ago, there's no sun, it isn't very warm, and there's no wind, so there isn't much to actually dry the track.
We've just got notification through that the safety car is coming in at the end of this lap, so we will be going racing for some 18 minutes or thereabouts. We've got just over 19 minutes remaining on the race clock. They're about halfway through on this lap, and that means anybody who was going to take that gamble on going for slicks has maybe lost that window when it would have been without any penalty, because as it is, they'll probably emerge some 40 seconds behind the tail of the field if they make the switch now. So we should be in for some very, very entertaining racing here. Now, you've got an army of driver coaches working with you this weekend. What will they have told their drivers about the safety car restart here at Paul Ricard, and where to have the car perfectly positioned to try and gain a place?
That's a very good question, and I've left that to them because that's what they're paid for. But I guess they'll be, coach the drivers to try and keep control, concentrate, always know what they're doing, and be ready. There's nothing more frustrating than a driver who lags back on a safety car restart and everybody bunches up behind him.
Well, it's Nelson Mason who's going to have the honour then of getting the racing underway this year in the 2013 European F3 Open, the first of two races here at Paul Ricard this weekend, as we take a glance down the field at Cameron Twynham in one of the Copper class cars, one of the Team WestTech cars. And Mason's backing the field up into a nice tight track. It's a very tight sequence of corners to finish the end of the lap here, in particular the final right-hander is particularly tight, so you want to make sure your rivals aren't immediately behind you as the safety car peels in. Mason heads around that final turn. The race gets underway, but he's got the black car of Hector Hurst right in his wheel tracks as we get racing then. For the first time this year, they flash through and the green flags are displayed, and I think Mason's got enough of an advantage here over Hurst, at least not to be under any risk of a challenge into turn one. Sandy Stuvik takes a little look to inside Roberto La Rocca, nothing doing there. It's in the midfield where the most likely place changes are going to come from. Swooping around the outside is one of the Emilio De Villota Motorsport cars. We'll pick up momentarily as to exactly who that was. Everybody seems to have swept through the opening sequences of corners fairly cleanly, and Mason is already putting away. Roberto La Rocca, though, coming under a lot of pressure from Sandy Stuvik, as launching a move.
Marusca.
In the BVM car, gaining the position as well. So they're almost three wide as they arrive into turn 5. That's going to look a little bit tight.
I think that's Urien, the Copper leader, who's just been overtaken.
Yeah, and he's got one of the Campos cars as well, right up onto his tail as the race leaders then sprint onto the Mistral Straight for the first time. And already Nelson Mason...
A spinner.
Yeah, we've got a spinner at the back of the field.
It's a De Villota car.
It is.
Another spinner. Another spinner.
Oh, and there's several of them going around. One of the Campos cars has gone too. So a little bit of over-exuberance with the right foot as they're all running wide. So clearly the track is an awful lot damper maybe than we thought it was, and they're all getting caught out, and there's contact, and that's one of the WestTech cars. It
looks like two of the WestTech cars to me, but never mind.
Who have gone around.
And I think La Rocca got some wing damage? I'm not sure.
See.
I hope not.
Well, in fact, what he's got is a fantastic run on Hector Hurst. He really saw off the challenge of Sandy Stuvik. Everybody who spun seemed to have recovered. So there is the number 15 car of Mario Marusca, who fights his way through as we move into the final third of this first racing lap. It is almost certainly going to be a timed race, so we've got just 16 minutes left in the race, and so many of the drivers being caught out there, John, by the lack of temperature in the tyres, and actually the lack of grip as well into the hard braking zones.
I think it was just 1, 2, 3 cars looked like they had exactly the same spin. Fortunately, hopefully they all avoided each other, and everybody's able to resume.
Sandy Stuvik coming under a lot of pressure there from Santiago Urita, as we've got Marasca, who is coming to tail of the train of cars, being headed by the number 14 car. That's Mateo Vita in the top F3 entry. So they come through them and complete what's actually the 6th lap of the race. It's the first racing lap, so it's Mason from Hurst, then Larocca, then Stuvik, and Alexei Chuklin as well, who is showing very strongly. The Duncan Tappy coach driver, and Chuklin looks around the outside and goes through. That's a brilliant move into turn 1. Also very tight and jostling for places further behind. That's Santiago Urita, who has gained the place on Mateo Vita. That elevates him up into 6th position in terms of the copper class. That's being led at the moment by Chae-Won Lim, the Korean driver, down in 11th position as they flash through turns 3 and 4. And then already begin to think about the long wind onto Mr. Australia. Got waved yellow flags, which would suggest that maybe one of our lap 1 spinners has not made a recovery. Right, let's have a look at them. And yes, it was just getting some wheels onto the blue paint, wasn't it, on the outside of the circuit that was pitching the cars around.
I think that's Yuri in the first one, and here it's basically everybody.
Well, you'll be pleased to know it's not 2 Westtech cars, but it was the Westtech car that rather drop-kicked the other one out of contention.
That's another Westtech car there, the Quan Zhu, enjoying himself.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't want your mechanics to have the evening off, would you? And that doesn't look like it's going to be the case now. So a lot of spinners on this first lap of racing, but fortunately not too much in the way of casualties. All the while, though, Nelson Mason is leading substantially. We've got one car that's pulled off there at the edge of the circuit. There's Hector Hurst in second. He has withstood the challenge of Roberto Larocca for the time being, but Larocca's now got to start thinking here about Alexei Chuklin, because the Russian driver is very rapidly closing up into his tail. It's the blue car with the green helmet of Larocca, then Chuklin in the all-black machine. Then we've got this superb scrap going on behind us. Vita runs very wide. He's going to lose a couple of places there. Spencer Piggott is... or rather, it was Marasca who ran wide. Spencer Piggott gained one of those places, and the other, I think, is Alexander Toril, although maybe just a bit too optimistic there. Marasca leering all over the circuit. He holds the position. He's actually lost a lot of ground to Spencer Piggott. Is now free to continue chasing down car immediately in front of him, which is the number 14.
Mateo Vita.
Yeah. I think that's Marasca who's right ahead of him. We'll pick them all up in a couple of moments as they come through over the line. So it's Chuklin still in 4th. He's not overseen Larocca. Then Stuvik and Urita, which completes the top 6. And then really it's this fight for 7th position, which is headed up by Mateo Vita. And then we've got Spencer Piggott, who's again, some of them out, breaking themselves, running a little bit wide there. I think that was Urita who possibly missed his braking point. So it's Mateo Vita who's right ahead of Spencer Piggott. That's a very close battle. Then we've got Marasca and Toril as well fighting away. And the race hasn't really settled down yet, and they've only got some 12.5 minutes of racing to go.
Yes, Chucklin's looking pretty racy, I have to say. So I think that possibly was him running wide at turn 1, challenging Larocca. So I'm pleased if he's dropped back a little bit, but he's looking pretty good.
So we see having a wild ride over the curbs and just avoiding the cones there, Artur Janos, the Polish driver in the Campos racing car. I guess the next factor they're going to have to consider here is whether or not those wet tyres are going to go off in the latter stage of the race, because we've still got a fair amount of time left on the clock. Spencer Piggott very much in the thick of the action, as are a lot of the Emilio de Vallota Motorsport and RP Motorsport cars. Piggott may have lost a place there, actually, on the run along the Mistral Straight. He's got them. Alexander Toril just behind him, who raced last year as Alexander Bokwoy in the Cedars car in the copper classes side by side. And Chuklin is now having to defend from Standy Stuvik, and we're seeing that the fortune's really fluctuating. So a few moments ago, Chuklin was right on the tail of Roberto Larocca. He's now busy fighting for that 4th position with Standy Stuvik, the Thai driver, on his tail. And well, it's not been the easiest start to the day for Alexei Chuklin, because his driver coach Duncan Tappy parked the car in the market square in the local town overnight, forgetting there was a market this morning. Woke up, found the car had been removed, and had to hotfoot it into a taxi to the circuit. Promised Duncan we wouldn't recount that story on air, but never mind.
Well, I didn't know that, so I'm sure I won't mention it to my team when I get back to them.
Well, what we might be talking about in the Westtech garage is Spencer Piggott, because that's a superb move. He's lining up on Mateo Vita. He's got the inside line from the next corner. That's absolutely lovely driving from Spencer Piggott as they come through the final turn and on to complete the 8th lap of the race. And really opportunistic driving there through turns 13 and 14. And it means that Vita is demoted. He's also got Alexander Toril then right on his tail to worry about. Those 3 cars about to arrive into turn 1. Vita dives to the inside. That's to defend from Toril rather than challenge Piggott, although he thinks about launching to the inside of the American driver, who holds his line, holds his nerve. And now Toril then in the RP Motorsport car, that's the silver, black and orange car, sets about the all-black machine of Vita. They're 3 wide going into turn 3, and it's Toril who takes advantage, moves up into 8th position. He holds it through turn 4. How much longer he'll hold that for, I don't know. Mario Marasca as well in the white and orange car is climbing right up onto the tail of that trio to boot. Now that is good news for Spencer Piggott in 7th, because that unleashes him to then chase his way up the order a little bit.
Yeah, it's good racing there, Ben, from the drivers. I suspect you're right that the tyres possibly are starting to give up, but with just under 10 minutes to go, there's no question anybody's going to want to come in and change tyres, and it's the same for everybody. So, part of the management for the driver is how he's been looking after his tyres. So maybe we're going to see some people move forward, maybe we'll see some people move backwards.
Well, at the moment, Nelson Mason leading the way, as making a slight mistake was Matteo Vita in the chicane midway down the Mistral straight, and still the breaking point for that clearly seems to be aspirational, ambitious for most of them, but they all somehow have squeezed through. As now we have,
I think Marasca may have moved back a couple of places to 12th now.
Instead, what we've got is Spencer Piggott under real pressure from Alexander Toril, who got a good run in the slipstream behind the American as they went along the Mistral straight through the Corte d'Assine. So 7th and 8th position engaging in battle. It's still Nelson Mason who leads by almost 4 seconds from Hector Hurst in 2nd. 3rd place, Roberto LaRocca. 4th is Alexei Chuklin. 5th is Sandy Stuvik, and Chuklin and Stuvik having a good scrap in 6th. And a little bit lonely is Santiago Urita, and that's largely because we've got this ferocious fight that's going on for 7th position just behind. So there is the race leader, Nelson Mason. 2nd place, Hector Hurst, and Hurst closed in by only 1/10 of a second on that occasion, so that gap isn't coming down particularly rapidly. 3rd place, Roberto LaRocca. Then we've got this fight for 4th and 5th. So Alexei Chuklin consults his mirrors, arrives into the first corner, left-hander, before sweeping to the right, just sliding the rear of the car a little bit. And then you catch a glimpse of Santiago Urita in 6th position. There's almost side by side for 4th. They went in the middle of the field. Plenty of battling going on as Gerardo Nieto has moved up into the lead of the Copper class over the course of the last lap. And that's Chaewon Lim, who's looking to fight back onto the tail of Nieto. They're also 13th and 14th in the race overall, as busy defending, and that is Cameron Twynham trying to squeeze through as well past Chaewon Lim. So we've got the 3 cars in the Copper class, 1st, 2nd and 3rd, going wheel to wheel, and it would seem that of that trio, Cameron Twynham may well be the fastest.
Cameron's had an exceptional weekend so far. Yesterday in free practice he was the fastest Copper car with a little margin, and so I'm delighted to see how he's racing. And again, that shows you, the true qualities of the Copper class. These boys, they may be down in the fringes of the top 10 or outside overall, but they're going at it hammer and tongs.
Let's see if we see any changes in that Copper class top 3 then as they arrive into the chicane midway down the Mistral straight. They're on the tail of Mario Marasca, who's got lots of airtime in this race, but seems to have been bubbling up and down the order. Still plenty of scraps going on throughout the course of the field, and this is the beauty of the Copper class, and the drivers really get to learn their racecraft. There's still Alexander Toril frustrated on the tail of Spencer Piggott. We've got waved yellow flags.
Looks like a slowing car there. Could have been a Westec car. I hope it wasn't Piggott.
Not Spencer Piggott, because there he is in the midst of his battle. We'll look to try and pick up the leaders when they come through. Very short to complete that. We've got 6 3/4 minutes left in the race. Team managers of car 60, which is Vicky Piria, and car 53, which is Lorenzo Paggi, have been summoned to race control for a consultation on their drivers' behaviour as the leaders come through and complete the 10th lap of the race. And Mason has extended his advantage over Hector Hurst by another 0.2 of a second. But Roberto LaRocca, is he just beginning to slide back into the clutches of Sandy Stuvik? In the car that was going slowly could possibly have been Alexei Chuklin, because he is now being caught very rapidly by Santiago Urita.
It's possible, or I'm not sure if it's maybe somebody missed the chicane, made up a load of places and lifted to hopefully let everybody back through.
Also Denis Nagul in the Campus car, the former Russian touring car racer, in his 2nd year in the European F3 Open, going somewhat slowly along the start-to-finish straight, which is a great shame. We've got a drive-through penalty which has been awarded to Vicky Piria for what we know not. As looking to move up through the order, Gerardo Nieto all over the tail of Mario Marasca. It's the fight for 11th, but it's also the fight for the Copper Class lead. We've got the three of them in the Copper Class side by side for second and third, and Cameron Twynham looking around the outside of the Korean driver Chae-Won Lim, who is able to hold on there. We've also got one of the core better competition
Tommaso Mencini
coming onto the tail as well. That is the bright yellow machine, and we've got another of the Westech cars, Luca Orlandi, which isn't in the Copper Class, but is very much part of this fight. As we've got a big lurid spin, and that's the Copper Class leader coming on to the Mistral Straight. Gerardo Nieto goes around. He only loses 3 places.
He held it beautifully.
But he will be ruining that mistake as the Spencer Piggott battle, that four-way fight, is coming together very quickly. So it's Chae-Won Lim who leads, or led, the Copper Class. He runs very wide through the chicane. Now that is Cameron Twynham's opportunity to pounce as they come back onto the Mistral Straight, the run along towards the Courbe du Cygne. We're into the final 5 minutes of this race, and it is side by side for the lead in the Copper Class. It's Twynham to the inside. To the outside was Chae-Won Lim. We go back to the fight for 7th position, where we see Alexandre Cougnaud making a lovely move on Matteo Vita, gaining the position. That is for 9th place then. French driver Alexandre Cougnaud, who was a regular podium finisher in the Copper Class last year, and he is coming very good in the latter stages of this race. Santiago Urita still on the tail of Alexei Chuklim. We've also got another drive-through penalty that's been awarded. That is Lorenzo Paggi. As sliding sideways, Spencer Piggott hits the brakes into turn 14 on to complete another lap. And yes, we are now to a timed race as we've got a spinner there.
Sean Walkinshaw.
Sean Walkinshaw goes around. Cone sent flying by Vicky Piria. And Piggott now having to really defend from Alexander Toril into turn 1, who goes around the outside of him. Lovely move from Toril, and now Piggott's in the position of being rather bullied here by the RP Motorsport cars, because he's got Alexandre Cougnaud right on his tail as well. Piggott looking to go back to the inside of Toril, and that exposes him to the challenge from the outside. Around the outside then goes Alexandre Cougnaud. Lovely move from the Frenchman, but still Piggott's trying to keep his nose to the inside.
You have to be very, very impressed with Spencer Piggott. And before this weekend, he's done 20 laps in an old spec British F3 car at Pembrey. He's come here, we've made the seats, and he's gone out yesterday. He's never driven a Formula 3 car in the wet. You know, this is proper impressive stuff.
But he's now going to have to fight tooth and nail, I think, to hold on to that place, because he's now got Matteo Vita right on his tail as well. So Piggott right to the inside, Vita swarming in the all-black car for position, and still Cougnaud having to plant his machine firmly to the inside of the road, or firmly to the middle of the road rather. Now who's going to have the run into the second part of the Mistral Straight? You have to say it could possibly be Vita here. He got a very smooth exit from the chicane. The Copper Class, by the way, Chae-Won Lim is still holding off Cameron Twynham in the race overall. Nelson Mason is on the cusp of having a 4-second advantage as we head to the fight for 4th position, or 5th position rather, between Alexei Chuklim and Santiago Urita, and Urita goes through and takes 5th place away from the Russian driver Alexei Chuklim.
A good manoeuvre there, Ben. That takes him up to 4th. These guys have actually been battling away for a while. Chuklim was very quick at the beginning of the race, as we saw Hassett and LaRocca, but they dropped back a little bit.
Yeah, Alexei Chuklim just getting a little bit ragged as well as this race is moving into its latter stages, and we could just about be into the final lap here. It's going to be very, very close as to whether or not there's going to be any time left on the clock when Nelson Mason comes through next time round. His advantage over Hector Hurst is 4.1 seconds, and Mason has controlled this one absolutely beautifully. We've not seen much of him, given how close and competitive it's been through the rest of the field. So here is the race leader, the Canadian driver Nelson Mason. Just doing everything very smoothly, very gently, not pushing any harder than he absolutely has to. And he's got that advantage over Hector Hurst, and really, he can't have asked for a much better start to the season. So he points the car along the Mistral Straight. There is Hurst in the background, in the mist, and in no particular position to challenge. We are into the final lap of the race here. And Mason, well, he just needs to keep that concentration level to the extent it has been all race long. He hits the braking point perfectly for the chicane midway along the back straight. And this really is exactly the sort of drive you want to see from one of your chargers in Formula 3. Smooth, in control, pushing very, very hard, but never looking ragged.
Very, very impressive driver, Nelson. Very intelligent driver. I mean, as I say, we had a Winter Series this year, which is very well supported, and he won that just from his teammate Ed Jones, who I said isn't here this weekend, but we'll be back with us next time in Portimao. He can't impress me anymore.
Hector Hurst then in second. Third place, Roberto La Rocca is being caught by Sandy Stuvik, so he could yet have a switch for that final podium position. Let's see what the tyre driver can do to get onto terms. Well, he's running out of corners here. The clock is about to tick to 0.
I think something happened to Urrutia.
Santiago Urrutia is not through sector 2, which is what John Miller's drawing your attention to, as through the final corner then is the race leader and about to be race winner in the opening round of the 2013 European F3 Open. Nelson Mason is who takes the checkered flag, to the delight of the Westech team, hanging out over the pit wall. Second position, very strong drive from Nelson Mason, and then to complete an excellent day for Team Westech, they also round off third with Roberto La Rocca. Sandy Stuvik taking fourth. Now what about the rest of the squabbles within the top 10? Let's see if we've lost Urrutia. Santiago Urrutia.
Chucklin's through, Torril's through, Cunyo's through.
So it's Alexei Chuklin who takes 5th. Alexander Toril completes the top 6th. Alexandra Cugno in 7th. Matteo Vita in 8th. And so we'll unravel the mystery of what happened to Uruguayan on that final lap.
It looks like we may have lost Spencer Piggott as well.
Due course, yes, we do. So
Cameron Twiden won the Copper class. Fantastic.
He did, and what happened to Chewan Lim? He is there. He just lost ground in the last couple of laps, and climbing up to third in the Copper class is Liam Venter, who wasn't really in contention for much of the race, and Liam Venter has come through to finish 14th overall, third in the Copper class. We'll give you the full breakdown of position shortly, but there's evidently been quite a sort out on that final lap of the race, because we've lost 2 of the front runners in the form of Santiago Urrutia and Spencer Piggott off camera. And that's what happened to Urrutia.
Car looks fairly second-hand to me.
As he's obviously come into contact with something, maybe along the straight, because that's the chicane midway along the Mistral straight. So it is the victory then for Nelson Mason. Second place has gone away of Hector Hurst. Third, Roberto La Rocca. Fourth, Sandy Stuvik. Fifth, Alexei Chuklin. And then in the Copper class, it was victory for Cameron Twynham. Second for Chewan Lim. And third for Liam Venter. So
pretty good day for Team Westech. First and third in both classes. Thank you.
Very good day. So let's take a look then at those final results, with the victory for Mason. Second place, Hector Hurst. Third, Roberto La Rocca. Sandy Stuvik in fourth. Alexei Chuklin fifth. Toril then claimed sixth. Cugno seventh. Matteo Vita in eighth. Mario Marascroft, dramatic race in ninth. And Luca Orlandi up into the top 10. Superb for him. 11th was Cameron Twynham, and he won the Copper class, with Chewan Lim taking second in the Copper class, and Liam Venter completing the Copper class podium. And yes, no checkered flag for Santiago Urrutia, although he is compensated by saying the fastest lap of the race. Spencer Piggott also falling by the wayside in that dramatic final lap. And as you say, John, for Team Westech, you couldn't have asked for a much better start to the year.
No, over the from the course of the close season, we worked extremely hard on improving the performance of the cars. That looks a bit like Spencer Piggott stood there. I can't see any damage. We worked very hard. As I say, we had a very well-supported Winter Series, which we finished third and second in. We came here. Some of the other guys, Hurst, as you know, they've worked hard as well. They've closed up, but we've managed to stay on top, which is very satisfying.
It's probably not the time to remind you, the driver who won the first race last year, Juan Carlos Sistos, didn't see the top step of the podium again all season.
Well, let's see if Nelson can see the top step tomorrow.
Well, that's the next challenge for the teams, because, of course, they do have a further race tomorrow. I suspect that John is going to have to take his leave and present himself in the podium with trophies to be awarded after a very lively and dramatic first race of the season for the European F3 Open. And unfortunately, you've also been summoned to the race director, John.
OK, well, it's a busy afternoon for me. Car 12 is
Nelson Mason.
Nelson Mason. OK, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Ben. Perhaps I'll speak to you tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks very much then to John Miller, the team principal of Team Westech, for talking us through the first race of the year of the European F3 Open, as Roberto La Rocca arrives into position in Parc Fermé, and I just wonder whether or not the car that we saw pulled off on that slowing down lap was indeed the race leader Nelson Mason. Yes, it is Nelson Mason, stranded out on the far side of the circuit, so the race leader Nelson Mason unfortunately isn't going to be arriving into the podium area in the imminent future. This, of course, the first of 8 rounds of the year for the European F3 Open, because from Paul Ricard they then head to Portimao in a fortnight's time. That is followed by a trip to the Nürburgring at the start of June, then on to Jerez at the end of the month, before a visit to Silverstone in the middle of July. Then we have the summer break before the circus reconvenes at Spa in early September, before heading later in September on to Monza, and then the championship finishes as it did last year in early November at the Circuits Catalunya in Barcelona. So a long year of racing ahead for these drivers. The first of 16 races, though, under their belt, and given the very difficult conditions that I think have really worsened in that last lap of the race, and then going into the slowing down lap, because it is beginning to rain ever so slightly here again at Paul Ricard. So the race coming to a close at the perfect time for the drivers in the European F3 Open. They will be back tomorrow for their second race of the weekend, and they have a separate qualifying session for the second race, which is due to get underway very first thing tomorrow morning, and that will then give us the grid for tomorrow's race. So for the drivers that have suffered disappointment today, that has no bearing on their grid position for tomorrow, as we take a look at some of the adventures throughout the field in what proved to be a very tricky race. Big spin there for Juan Zhu, the brother of former F2 racer David Zhu, also encountering a little bit of trouble at that chicane midway along the Mistral Straight. Artur Janos, the Polish driver, running for the Campos team. The Emilio Velosa Motorsport cars also taking a big bite out of cone. That was Chaewon Lim, who eventually came through to claim second on the Copper class rostrum. Handshakes all round for Liam Venter then, who in the very late stage of the race, we didn't see it on camera, was able to launch his way up through the Copper class to eventually claim third in class. And both the overall race podium and the Copper class podium are going to be pretty much symmetrical. It will be Team Westtech cars in first and third places, with then Emilio de Velosa Motorsport cars claiming second position. So that's Chaewon Lim, who heads up to the rostrum as we take a check of some of the highlights of the race. The safety car was on track for the early stages. When it pulled in, it was Nelson Mason who led the field away, and he would continue in that position all the way through to checker flag. Hector Hurst tried to run him closely into the first turn. That didn't happen, but Hurst in turn was able to pull clear of Roberto La Rocca, who withstood the initial challenge from Sandy Stuvik, and then came under repeated challenges from the tyre driver throughout the course of the race. The first lap, as they came onto the Mistral Straight, at the background we had Formula 3 cars going around like spinning tops, as a couple of them just ran a little bit wide. The same thing then happened when they arrived into the braking zone for the chicane midway along the straight. Once the race begun to settle down, the dicing was utterly fantastic and very, very frantic, as Alexander Toril in the bright orange helmet was one of the stars as he picked his way up through the pack. Also Matteo Vita in the all-black car was to be found frequently in the thick of the action. We had a super scrap for the lead of the Copper class, which was initially headed by Gerardo Nieto before he spun it away, and then Chaewon Lim losing out to Cameron Twynham. Santiago Urrutia and Alexei Chuklin had one of the scraps of the race, which initially looked as it was going to go the way of the Uruguayan until he found misfortune on the final lap. There were no such problems, though, for Nelson Mason, and it was Mason who took the checker flag to claim the first victory of the year in the European F3 Open, much to the delight of the Westtech team, who were applauding and celebrating over the pit wall. Second position went the way of Hector Hurst, with Roberto La Rocca completing the rostrum. We've got the drivers waiting to be announced up on to the first of the podiums of the season. And so we start with the overall race podium. So in third place it was Roberto La Rocca, second place Hector Hurst, and then our race winner Nelson Mason hasn't made it to the rostrum. And there is the race winner, Nelson Mason, receiving a toe back, so he won't get to enjoy his moment of glory on the podium here at Paul Ricard. He'll have to try and claim victory again tomorrow to enjoy celebrations on the top of the podium. Gavin Wills on the rostrum as well, representing Team Westec. So we pause national anthems.
Mesdames et messieurs, remise maintenant des trophées avec Monsieur Firdos Avari.
So we have the trophies being presented by Firdos Avari from Dunlop. So first of all, the third place trophy for Roberto La Rocca, who gives the thumbs up. The trophy for second place to Hector Hurst. It's a really strong result for Hector as well, after what was a frustrating year in Formula 2 last year. And then eventually sprinting to the rostrum, Nelson Mason there in time to get his winner's trophy. Just in the nick of time. Also, Gavin Wills then picking up the team's trophy on behalf of Team Westec. And for the drivers, the weekend is now only half done because, as we said, they will be qualifying first thing tomorrow morning and then having their second race of the weekend tomorrow afternoon. So they've got it all to do all over again. But for Nelson Mason, well, he will be very, very confident at his chances of repeating this tomorrow, because a victory of almost 4 seconds. It was eventually 3.3 on the line, but that was after a slower final lap. So now the hard work of the day is done. The champagne unleashed on the rostrum. Or at least it is for Hector Hurst. The cork doesn't seem to want to come off the bottle for Nelson Mason. Never mind, he's got the spoils of victory. Hurst in second and Roberto La Rocca in third, also struggling to get the bubbly spraying. So as the drivers from the race overall vacate the rostrum, we'll now turn our attention to the Copper class podium, which, as we saw, was another fantastically competitive race with positions being swapped throughout the field. And it was Cameron Twynham who eventually prevailed, having held his nerve in that frantic dice with Che Wan Lim and Gerardo Nieto that we saw. And Lim may just be frustrated. This could have been one that got away. We didn't see the move that Twynham made to take the lead of the class. Certainly when we last saw them fighting, Che Wan Lim was in really a very strong and commanding position in the class. So up into third on the rostrum is the South African driver Liam Venter. Second place goes to Che Wan Lim, and then the Copper class race winner, Cameron Twynham. Arrives now onto the top step of the podium. Smiles all around on the rostrum. And again, the national anthems. National anthems completed. Time for the presentation of the trophies, and again in ascending order. So the third place trophy, first of all, to Liam Venter. The runners-up trophy to Che Wan Lim, and then the winner's trophy to be presented to Cameron Twynham, who gets his Copper Class season off to the best possible start. Copper Class drivers about to unleash the champagne on the podium, which means it's almost time for us to say goodbye from Paul Ricard from the first race of the season from the European F3 Open. They will be back for their second race of the weekend tomorrow, where I'm sure we'll be in for more fast and frantic action like we have seen today. But until then, from myself, Ben Evans, and also on behalf of John Miller, who was able to join me here in the commentary box, we will say goodbye and we'll look forward to your company for the rest of the season.